Welcome to More Tea Vicar with myself, James Stevenson, and
Wayne Massey.
This week we're going to catch up with Wayne's time in Rwanda. Wayne, you went to Rwanda recently.
I did.
Tell us a bit about it, why you were there, and what you saw.
Actually, I think we can kind of widen it beyond that, because I went with an organisation called SOMA, which means the Sharing of Ministries Abroad, and you are off to northern Uganda to work with the South Sudanese Church.
Yeah, hopefully into South Sudan.
Hopefully into South Sudan in March. We are part of the Church of England, which is part of the Anglican Communion.
Yeah.
And there is a kind of, which makes it, I think it's like the world's second largest denomination, much more loosely held than the Church of England. And SOMA, the concept...
You mean the Roman Catholic Church, much more loosely held than the Roman Catholic Church.
Did I say Church of England?
Yeah.
I meant the Roman Catholic Church. Anyway, so SOMA, Sharing Ministries Abroad, it's about 40 years old, and the idea is its kind of core thing is to strengthen the nervous system of the body, and so works with the whole of the Anglican Communion, but with a sort of particular emphasis on the least visited and supported places. But the idea is that everybody has something to bring to everybody and something to learn from everybody and inspired by everybody. So it started primarily going and teaching theology into the two-thirds world. But as it's shifted, it's become a very much, and it's always had this two-way thing that sometimes people from the West might go and teach theology, but people from elsewhere will come and do missions in the UK. Teams will be made up of people from all over the Anglican Communion. And actually, what it does is it does what it says in tin, strengthen the body. So
when we get into the New Testament, we're seeing letters from churches, and we're seeing greetings, and we're seeing already in the church this transfer of stories and faith across churches from different cultures as they grapple with what it means to follow Jesus and being inspired by that nervous system in I suppose, technologically a more primitive space where it would have been handwritten letters sent to people, and often people not being able to get there, but actually the sense of leaders coming with messages from places. So what we're going to do in this podcast is we're going to hear from Wayne about his time there, and the purpose of this is not just to kind of keep you up to date with Wayne's travels, but for us to be able to hear what God is doing, what life is like for our brothers and sisters in a very different part of the world, and for us to be able to learn from that and from our faith to grow. Both of us would say that actually we're sent on they're called mission trips, but they're not often actually mission trips. It's more about cross-cultural church engagement and strengthening of discipleship and the sharing of resources, and that's kind of SOMA's DNA. And so the trip you went on this time was quite different to the trip you went on to Uganda a couple of years ago. And our hope in this is that you end this podcast going, oh wow, that encourages me in my following of Jesus.
So if you're listening to this podcast, hear this in love, but you live in a bubble.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We all do. Yeah.
By that. So this Saturday just gone, our young edge of Bristol, and he went up early, and Wendy, my wife, his mother, same person, went to follow him and went via Yate to get something from the shops in Yate. And just, she said it was really interesting. Yate, which is next door to Bristol, actually feels so different to the Gloucester Road. And so we all live in these bubbles, and these bubbles, and we've talk about in this podcast, these bubbles have values and cultures. As you do your Bristol accent, it's the way we don't do things around here. What does he say? And there's nothing better than, and churches have bubbles. So there's a B&A bubble. There is a Christchurch Clifton bubble. There is a Holy Trinity Brompton bubble. Whatever church it is, there's a bubble. And so there's nothing better than actually engaging with fellow brothers and sisters in different cultures and in different churches, for you to learn from them, for you to help them with the stuff that they're going through because you see things differently, but also for your own bubble to be pricked and for you to have your cultural assumptions challenged. And so that is the most amazing thing, I think, about engaging with and working with the wider church across a city, across a nation, and across nations, is that you see what we all share in common. And also it's like a mirror up to how you do things, and to where, I mean, a mixture of where you do things well, you go, oh, we do that well, and quite often where you basically do things badly, and also where you complain and you have no right to complain.
There's always the temptation to reduce the God of the universe, the God of history, and the God of eternity down to the God of our specific culture. And so these are precious moments where we get to have that tendency just put in check by an understanding of what God is doing in another part of the world. So tell us, Wayne, you were in Rwanda, in East Africa.
So we went.
You'd not been there before, but
I've not
Charlotte,
been to,
your daughter.
Yeah, I've not been to Rwanda. Charlotte, our daughter, had been 18 months ago. And so we went, we'd been invited by the Diocese of Krongi. So maybe in the West we're used to church planting, but this is a diocese plant. So a wonderful man called Jean-Pierre a number of years ago, they basically took the corners of 3 dioceses that had, I think, maybe 2 or 3 parishes in them.
Yeah.
I can't remember, might have been a bit more than that. And they made a new diocese and made him a bishop, and then kind of said, off you go. And then COVID happened. And so we were going to spend some time in some of his parishes, do some Sundays, and then principally do a 3-day clergy conference, which we'll come on to why it shifted, but which we thought was about teaching theology, and turned out to be something else. The context of Rwanda, I think, is really important for us to understand. So we probably all know that, like 1994, there was a genocide, and that genocide, we think about it as the Rwandan genocide, but actually it heavily impacted Burundi. So Paul Sankey, member of our church family, Paul and Lisa and their girls were in Burundi at the time, and they've talked about it. But there was this genocide in Rwanda, and the current government had moved in from Uganda and stopped the genocide, and have been in power ever since. A guy called Paul Kagame, and it's a kind of gently authoritarian government, and so it's quite a heavily kind of authoritarian state. But alongside that, there's an awful lot of work is done to kind of bring the level of kind of the standard of living up. I would say that they're the best roads in Africa I've been on outside of South Africa.
Yeah.
I was blown away by Kigali, the capital, at about 10 o'clock at night when we arrived, because we got to traffic lights and everybody stopped. And you're smiling. If you've been in other African countries, everybody's like, "What's the traffic light?" Yeah. I remember being in Kampala a couple of years ago at a roundabout, and there was a traffic policeman in the middle of the roundabout, and basically I don't think he knew what he was doing there, and I don't think anybody else knew. But actually, and I was just like, there was an order to the place. Yeah. But the flip side of that is there is a level of control, and so opposition to the government is non-existent and not supported.
So things like, I'm guessing police would be armed?
Yes, I mean they are. There's a lot of police around. I would say that we saw less armed police than I saw in Uganda a couple of years ago, but that was because I was on the border of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So actually, it's the safest. The reason Charlotte went as part of a teenage group is it is the safest country in Africa, because Kagame's worked very hard to make sure that the tensions. We'll come on to this a bit, but the tensions in Rwanda aren't there anymore, and so it's a heavy police state, and actually, they kind of have maintained that. So that's one thing that sets sets the tone for the place, which is kind of a mixture of success and a mixture of control. Yeah. The other thing that clearly does set the tone for the place is that. I'm from a country that halved its population through famine in the 1840s, and it still shapes Ireland. So actually, a genocide 30 years ago is going to shape a country still. Yeah. And when you meet anybody, I spent some time with a wonderful archdeacon who's 39. He was 9 when it happened. Yeah. And some people will tell you about what they went through, and some won't. So the Bishop of Shogwe is an amazing story of being the only person surviving from his family, and in a bit of a drought, and lying in a ditch and praying for rain, and rain coming, and then being found by a missionary and brought up by a missionary, now having come to faith in Jesus, giving his whole life to that. You'll find a lot of families where the dad might be a lot older because his whole first family had died, and so he remarried, and so anybody from about sort of what you might call memory age, so late 30s all the way up, they're carrying something. Yeah. And some people like to talk about it, some don't. There's genocide memorials everywhere, but it feels like one of my favourite. I'm just laughing because I didn't finish the book, but I did enjoy it. A Certain Idea of France is a biography of Charles de Gaulle, in which it basically said after the Second World War, de Gaulle had to make up this kind of myth about the French in order to get over the hump that half of them had been collaborators, and so everybody was in the resistance. And the premise of the book is that after the myth teller goes, that then the country begins to kind of go, oh, hold on a second, that wasn't quite true.
Yeah.
And so what they've done in Rwanda is they've kind of said, well, there are no Tutsis, there are no Hutus, we're all Rwandans.
Yeah.
Although actually 30 years later, you'll see that that's changing, and they're talking about Tutsis and Hutus again. Yeah. And so there's an element of you've had to bury stuff, even in the midst of seeking truth and reconciliation, which means you've buried a whole load of other stuff as well. So that's kind of sets the context. I'm nearly there. And then the other thing that's happened is the government are really rather good at, as I said, sort of upping standards. So in order for you to have a church building open at the moment, it has to meet a whole level of requirements, some of which are brilliant. Flushing toilets, some of which kind of or sort of don't make sense. Like in the most rural place, you need to have windows that can close and soundproofing. You need to have a certain type of paint on the floor. You need to have fire extinguishers. And you need to have a car park. And so you have to meet these building requirements. And then after that, you need, I think it's 1,000 members of the local community to have signed a petition for the opening of the church. And then more things. So it means that where we were going, there were 15 parishes and a whole load of sub-parishes. Covering a massive area, and there were only one open church building, and one they hoped to reopen. Okay. So, yeah.
So, for the people that
I don't know if that made any sense.
Yeah, for the people that you're going to serve, just you come into building here or wherever it is you're watching or listening to this, and it'll be hopefully warm. There won't be any restrictions around its use. There'll be issues around safeguarding and other areas of health and safety compliance. So, but for the majority of people, access to a local church in this country is not a problem. In fact, there's a proliferation of choice.
Yeah.
Here, for the people that you were serving, the clergy that were coming to you, if they had a church building or not, what does the local church look like in their area?
So it varied. So the cathedral was closed, and the cathedral had a brilliant thing where they were running everything over WhatsApp. So if you were the choir, you recorded stuff, sometimes singly, sometimes a few of you together. You're not allowed to meet outside in groups of over 20. So they can't meet outside. So the cathedral records something, the person giving the talk would record somebody would record some prayers, and then it all gets sent to the dean or the vicar of the cathedral, and everybody would log on to this WhatsApp channel at the same time, and he would basically drop the stuff in on a Sunday morning. Wow. Okay. So that it does make joining church means I just need to add you to the WhatsApp group. So so that's it at its best level. In a couple of places they are kind of meeting. Yeah. And the challenge.
So everyone's got a smartphone.
Yes, so this is the other thing that you're seeing, and this is not just a Rwandan thing, is you're seeing a real kind of like, so everybody has a smartphone. So you may not even have electricity in your house, but you have a smartphone, possibly quite a basic one, but loads of people have smartphones, especially in the urban areas. Rural areas a little bit more difficult. If you met somebody in their early 20s, and they're from an urban area, they and are kind of like, in Rwandan terms, kind of middle class, wealthy. They're very Western in terms of how they dress, and interesting enough, what they listen to. Okay. So like the Christians are listening to Elevation music in Maverick City and Bethel, and
so they're globalized in their increasingly globalized in their outlook, but also globalized in their understanding of faith.
Yes. So one of the big challenges, which is the same across most of Africa, is the influx of Islam and of a kind of a false prosperity gospel. If you give me loads of money, I will get a Rolls Royce, and you too will. Yeah. So that's the kind of context that these people are ministering into, and it's also, Rwanda's a Catholic country, so the Anglican Church is very much in the minority, which actually is quite a good thing, because the church in some places has a really bad rep post-genocide. So there were some places where they went for sanctuary where the priests turned on them. Yes. And other places where they went for sanctuary where the priests tried to save them. And so it's so there's a bit of a mixed bag. So there was the town that we were staying in has a massive Catholic church that was basically burned out with, I think, a few thousand people in it, where they're back in meeting and doing church in there, which is to walk in there. We went in there when it was empty. It's just quite, so you basically walk to church via a genocide memorial. So,
what's the film with John Hurt? Is it Shooting Dogs?
I don't know that one. I know A Sunday Afternoon by the Pool in Kigali, which is a great novel.
There are films about, that are less famous than the
Hotel Rwanda,
that tell that kind of story about faith.
The book to read, then we'll listen to what it is. We wish to inform you that tomorrow we will be killed with our children by Philip Gorovich, who's I think he's an Eastern European journalist. And then my favourite novel is A Sunday Afternoon by the Pool in Kigali, which is the basis of Hotel Rwanda.
Yeah.
So quick tangent. Anyway,
okay. So then you're bringing material from Soma.
So we're coming, and we've had so here we go. So we're coming. We're having a conversation with the bishop, and actually, what we're talking about is how you do. We're talking about our lessons for mission in post-Christendom. How do you do mission when you don't have buildings?
Yes.
And so, but we kind of have this rough. We've got a whole load of sort of a bit of regular teaching material from Soma, and also some other stuff that we've been thinking about this. But I'm going. Is this really what they need? And I'm not discounting the bishop. I'm just going. This until you get there, you kind of don't know. So I prep.
Stanley Howes.
What would he say?
He would say you can't know what to do until you know what's going on.
Basically, he's right. So we get there, and we very quickly. So we get there. We take a day or two to get to where we're going. And on the day, I'll just give you an example of just how advanced on one level the country is. On the day before we get there, we go via the drone medicine distribution center. They have these two amazing places that cover the whole country. And if you're running a hospital or a medical center in the most rural place in the world, you only need to keep 1 day's stock of blood, platelets, and medicine. And then what you do is at the end of every day is you send an email, and the next day at a set time, a drone flies over your center and parachutes you in what you need for the next day. And if an emergency happens, they can. I think the longest flight is 2 hours. So if there's an accident, you suddenly go, we need. Yeah. So we visited that centre. Every 90 seconds, a drone takes off and lands 24/7. It's just amazing. So we went. So you're seeing that we can't do that in the UK. Yeah. And then we go to Karongi, which is actually a touristy area. So it's this kind of area where there's hotels that we weren't staying in, but there are hotels that kind of almost feel like sort of European. Yeah. And we do church on the Sunday morning, and we do it in the local university, Polytechnic, with the Anglican students. Yeah. And that was really interesting because about 120 of them, all in their 20s, and they all dressed like us. Yeah. They were wearing Nikes. Yeah. They were wearing jeans, and they didn't dress up for church. They were all dressed very, very normally, and they did a mixture of Rwandan worship songs and also Western worship songs. Right. And the guy who preached said that. Talked about personally, there was a guy from our team, how the goodness of God was such a massive song for him because of health issues he'd had, and they were able to switch and sing that one next, and they all knew it. Okay. So we came out of that one. I was like, oh, okay, that was interesting.
So immediately there, you got two cultures going on in a local church.
Yeah, and
so
then
you kind of Antioch, Jew and Gentile alongside each other. You've got you as Westerners and Rwandans worshipping alongside each other, able to switch between different tongues.
Pretty much, and everything's being translated because I don't speak Kenya or Rwanda. Yeah. But lots of people speak French, and lots of people speak English. Yeah. And then the next 3 days we have a clergy conference, and we get there, and we've got about 30 people who are the clergy and what they call the catechists. So we'd call them lay ministers. Yeah. So the non-ordained number twos.
Average age?
I would say the average age was 30 to about 50.
Okay, so young in comparison to if you did a clergy conference in this country, probably.
Yeah.
And what kind of training and qualifications would they add in order to get to the point where they're ordained?
So to be ordained, you have to have a degree. Okay. But the degree might be more practical than theological. Yeah. So on lots of levels, highly educated, but probably have done less theological education than maybe you and I have. Yeah,
distance learning or in a.
Most of them have actually been to university. Okay. So right. This is the whole.
It's just important because you can have a picture of what Africa's
like. No.
So no running water, rural.
Oh no.
Actually, the guys who are doing it.
Where we were staying every night, you could go and we weren't drinking beer, but you could go and you could order a non-alcoholic sort of cider drink, and you could pay on your phone. Yeah. So Wendy kept messaging me going, "What is the romantic hotel that keeps appearing in our credit card bill?" Yeah. So that's the bit. It's not like
and so then, but then you're bringing theological education to them.
Yes. So we had a sense that it was interesting in prayer, and this is where I think so. Lesson number one is trust what the Holy Spirit's leading. We had a sense in prayer that we needed to create an environment for them to speak. And we had on our team 4 young Rwandans, aged 18 to 23. Who and our sense was that we needed to create a format that had these hour-long blocks, and that the first sort of 15 to 20 minutes was input, and the next 20 minutes was discussion, and the final 20 minutes was kind of reflection and prayer. And we felt that the first 20 minutes, that middle 20 minutes, they needed to get deep and get quickly and not feel that they were being either kind of watched or not feel that they needed to honor the foreigner in the group and translate all the way through. Yeah. And so we set up these groups. We asked the bishop to pick 4 groups, to divide them all up into 4 groups. We said he could do it how he wanted, and he just went 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, which was brilliant, because then he broke everybody up. And then we told them that these people who were their juniors were going to facilitate these groups. Now, it did a couple of things. Number one, for the young Rwandans on our team, that was like, that doesn't happen in their culture. So we had to really work with them to say, actually, you guys can do this. You've been trained to do this, because they have been. And actually, all you're doing is facilitating. But what we discovered very quickly was that they went... the feedback was, because we said we're going to do the same thing, we're going to answer the same questions, but in an English group, that they went deep quite quickly. And what we discovered, we started, our sense was, I wrote a whole load of material on identity and reminding us who we are in Jesus, and that opened up a whole load of stuff on day one. That meant that at the end of the first day, we sat down as a team and went, actually, we need to not teach about mission, we need to revisit forgiveness and healing and the person of the Holy Spirit. And this stuff that you think, well, they've all heard it before, that actually you need to be reminded. And so it moved from being what I would call a teaching conference to more like a kind of deeply theological retreat for 3 days. And it was, interestingly enough, one of the least demonstrative sort of 3 days I think I've ever had. There wasn't, it was just all very, very quiet. Which actually the bishop told us is a good sign. So that's what we kind of ended up doing, and it was that's that first lesson where you sometimes think you know. I'm going to put myself in the bishop's shoes. I sometimes think I know what my church needs, or what we all need. And actually somebody comes in from the outside and goes, "Oh, I know you've been thinking about this, but actually I see this." And that was the measure of the bishop, that he went, "Yeah, this is what we need to do." And that first point of, actually, that bit that we need people who step into our bubbles to go, "Oh, I see this."
So there's an African proverb that says, "The stranger bears the sharper knife." Which I think kind of encapsulates what you're saying, but from a kind of sword of the spirit point of view rather than a dagger. But the African proverb being that actually we need to kind of think of, well, the person I don't know may actually be carrying something about them that could be dangerous to me, that if I don't understand, so I need to be nice to them because I don't know what they might bring to me. But actually in a cross-cultural setting in terms of church, it means that we can see that people might be able to come to us from outside and see things about us that we can't see ourselves. And so that's a very beautiful place to be, where a leader can facilitate that. So 3 days. And that was kind of the bulk of the bulk of the time that you were doing. And what were they saying at the end of it?
Well, the things that we did was we kind of... The other thing I would say, that churches have its strengths and weaknesses. A massive strength of the African church is faith and expectation. So they have stories of healing, they have stories of deliverance, they have stories of salvation that would make our eyes go out on stalks. They are weak on discipleship, and they would admit that. And they're also quite hierarchical.
Right.
So so one of the things the bishop said is, I want them all not to do what I tell them all the time, but they all, then they would say, we want our children's workers not to do what we just tell them all the time. And there's a very hierarchical culture, which means that the idea of the priesthood of all believers is they believe, but they don't believe in terms of the equipping, like everybody's got gifts to use. And so that was something that we went with an amazing couple called Greg and Stephanie, who've been going to Rwanda for 25 years, and they have this wonderful teaching material that they've written called Working in God's Field, which is basically everybody gets to work in God's field. And we did some of that as well. And the bits that were quite amazing was we did some stuff where actually we got them into groups to wait on the Lord and to pray over one another, and we broke ourselves up into those ones. And so, this is what, Google Translate is amazing, because actually, no matter how good your English is, it's easy to say something in Rwanda. And so somebody would say, like, one of the person said, "Oh, I just got this sense of you," said something in Kinyarwanda, led me to a Bible verse, and I was able to say back to them and then type it in English so they could read it in Kinyarwanda, that somebody had prayed that over me 8 weeks earlier. But their eyes to go, like, you've traveled a couple of thousand miles, and the Lord's used me to say something that he said, And
so Google is amazing, but just in case we miss it, Jesus is even more
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Because we get to be. There's no other faith like it in the world. There's no other God presented to us that that compares with Jesus, who in these moments enables us to coexist within our cultures, within our languages, and for His word, His power to translate across those cultures in a way that's just so beautiful. I remember sitting with the guy who is who's now the Archbishop of Sudan, who at the time was just a mere bishop, and I asked him what it was like translating the New Testament into his language, and I said, what was your favourite verse? And his eyes just lit up, and I thought he was going to come up with some obscure verse, and he just beamed and said, when I heard the words, I am the way, the truth, and the life in my own language, my heart just swelled with joy. And there's something about that, the way that God speaks to us and across those cultures, that is just so inspiring.
And the amazing thing, so you go in, you think you're about to bring something to people, you end up doing something slightly different, you discover that the Lord is doing something in all of you, and that's what happens in these trips all the time. And you discover He's doing things in your heart as well. And then this is a bit of like, I feel like I'm throwing loads of paint at the wall. The other thing I would say that's really, really good for anybody who goes there is, especially coming from the bit of Bristol we live in, is and I've had a few conversations with, interesting enough, non-Christians about this, is there's this whole kind of post-colonial British guilt.
Oh, yes.
That actually, and I'm not saying colonialism was all good, and Nigel Bigger is the book to read on this, but you go out there and people are actually thankful for the fact that the gospel was brought to you, and thankful for some of the and
for its civilizing effect on society.
So one of the things we were told one night at dinner was that before Christians came to Rwanda, that when a girl got married in Rwanda, the first thing that then happened was the father-in-law would impregnate the girl, and then the baby, if there was a baby, would be sacrificed. And this young woman said, and that was up till about 150 years ago. And this young woman said, and because Christianity came, that stopped. And so we have this whole Western guilt that we've kind of ruined. And actually, when you meet a lot of them, they will tell you where you got things wrong. And the cause and the genocide was caused by historic actions of the Belgians primarily, but the whole of Europe was up in it. But they were picking up on tensions. They were picking up and running with tensions that already exist. And so I think it's this. So I'm not saying colonialism is good, but I'm saying it's far more nuanced. And if you go out and you spend time there, you'll meet a bunch of people who are, especially in the church, who are grateful for the gospel. And that was, I mean, Uganda, it's even bigger because of the Ugandan martyrs and because of the role of the Anglican Church there. They come around, they spend their life thanking you for bringing the gospel, and you go, well, it wasn't me. So that's just a quick tangent. That actually, I think the amount of people who have a view on history without having any experience of the places they're talking about in the West is huge, and I put myself in that same situation. I'm all over the place, James. Anyway, so these are these 3 days, and they're pretty amazing, and they are and then we brought this wonderful guy who was filming for us, and he said there was one time he came back almost in tears because he said he'd filmed a guy, and the guy had basically said that over the course of day 2, the Lord had spoken to him about an element of forgiveness from 30 years ago that he'd never dealt with, and that he'd been able to bring it up and handle it. And then, this Rwandan started weeping. He said, and actually, I've let this go, and I thought I had, and I hadn't. Or one guy came to me, so we had this one sense, this was it, we were praying on night 2 that people would have revelations in the night. We just said, let's pray this. So we prayed on night 2 as a team, that there would be people who would have revelations over the night, and then the next morning, the number 2 in the cathedral came to me and said, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and the Lord gave me a download. He uses the word download. He said for the evangelism strategy for the cathedral. He said, and he was like a revelation in the night. And so these, and you just go, oh, we prayed about that, So you do these 3 days. You're working really hard. You're trying to work out what's doing because it's all cross-cultural, and then you just see the Lord at work, and the Lord at work in all sorts of ways you didn't even imagine.
I would say that I think one of the great enemies of Christianity in the West is our competence, that we often don't see God at work because we don't leave space for Him to be at work, and because we come from a culture where we perceive ourselves to be competent, we require ourselves to be competent, we then think that churches should be competent. And there is a lot of truth in that. And there's an extent to which that there's a maturing of faith that is good and healthy. The shadow side of that, I would say, is that we don't constantly find ourselves in situations where we're having to rely on the Lord for the completion of what it is we've set ourselves to do.
I over-edit my talks. I know that.
And when we get into situations where we are working with somebody from another culture and another language, there is this consistent need to rely upon him to communicate what could be lost in translation. To understand what we can't understand because we're only flying in and flying out. And that in and of itself puts you in a posture where you're thinking, Lord, I don't know what to do. My eyes are on you.
Yeah.
And I would say that posture, if we could kind of bottle that and put that alongside the healthy maturity of what it means to run and live in churches in the West, then that would be dynamite.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Wayne, if you had brought back with you guests from Rwanda
yes.
that you had been working with, and we had an impartation, that's the word, isn't it?
Yeah.
If we were to impart something to them and they were to impart something to us, what do you think would be said between the two in a conversation? What faith? What would encourage us and what would encourage them?
Okay, so they are in about 10 years going through about 60, 70 years of cultural change that we went through. And I think the gift of the church in the West to them is we can have more confidence in the fact that we've held on to the gospel in a world that is where it's fallen apart. And actually, when you talk to them about like when we do discipleship well and when we think about the forms of church, that actually we don't impart them what to do, but we impart them permission giving to dream again. So I've said this to my new Rwandan friends who are kind of my age. If you spend any time with the guys in their 20s, it's clear that a slightly new form of Rwandan church is emerging, which is deeply Rwandan, but also heavily influenced by Western culture. And actually is incredibly gospel focused. So that one of the weaknesses of, I would say, of some of the churches in Africa that I visited is that it's the gospel to come to faith, and then it's an accidental works-based righteousness from there. And actually, there are these young people who've been heavily formed by really good stuff that get that it's the gospel all the way through. And these are the guys, and they also listen to Bethel and Maverick City and Tim Keller podcast, and that actually this kind of slight, I would say, hybrid that to give the church permission, and I think the Rwandan church is ahead of the curve because it's more developed than the countries around it, but to give them permission to dream again as to what church looks like. A lot of the ways they do church they learnt from us. So like in Uganda 2 years ago, I remember they were reading Bounds of Marriage, like we read Bounds of Marriage, and it's almost to say actually are there ways that you can do this differently. And I think that's the impartation that we would have to them is not this is how to do it, but actually you have permission to release young people to dream again and to release everybody into God's gifts. So that's what the church in the West definitely can bring and teach and equip. I think there is a so I was humbled. The two things that have happened the last two trips I've been has been humbled by the level of prayer that goes on. And so the people in their 20s in Shogwe Diocese meet and pray at 6 o'clock every morning, and then they're trying to start their own service, but they have to use one of the clergy, on a Sunday afternoon. But there's amazing things happening with the kind of the young adults in this town called Mahanga, and it's being birthed out of a prayer movement. And that was the same in Kasese in Uganda, and that actually they pray again. It's that bit because they don't have all the tools to their hand that we have. They just need to pray. They know they need to pray more, and I think that is the massive impartation there is to pray. I think there is. You see this the church in the parts of the world where there's either quiet persecution or there's challenge or danger just from the circumstances of life carries a far so simple is a really good theological term. We could unpack this with Thomas Aquinas one time, but they carry a far more simpler joy than we do, and I think we can learn from. and they do life. Like there was a couple of days, like the Western in me. There was a couple of days where I got a little bit frustrated. In that, there was one day where the bishop had basically said, "Oh, we've got a busy day today," and it involved 2 hours. That was all in like an 8-hour stretch, and you're thinking, "Oh no, we've come all this way. We should be doing stuff."
Yeah.
And actually, there's a healthier attitude towards the pace that you might move stuff.
Yeah.
But I think, and faith and expectation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, but I think this is the whole thing. I personally am convinced that the more that we can, and I think the more that we can experience, share with, and cross-fertilize with the church, the wider church, the better it is for us.
Wonderful. So to bring this into land, the church in South Sudan profoundly affected my understanding of God and the world. And so when we think about culture, theology, and life, the thing that can happen when we hear stories from elsewhere in the world is we can say to ourselves, well, that's not where I'm starting. That's not my culture. That's not my experience. They have a simple understanding of joy, you've just said. And we might say, well, we come from a more complex world, and therefore our understanding of joy might be more complex. And we can look too much to our culture to not just explain how we are now, but to justify our continued expression of that.
Can I just quickly? So we say that, and we all nod. Oh, much more complex, but we don't, because actually, let's just take this one country for example. I meet somebody my age, and for the first time, if I'm a Rwandan, I've got to try and work out: were you a victim or were you a perpetrator 20 years ago? I've got to work out where do you stand with the government. So, no, I'm just saying life is far more complicated in the West, and actually that is an absolute lie.
I'm not saying it's
I know you know, but I'm
But what can happen is we can end up locking ourselves into our cultural expression of Christianity,
our bubble,
in response to somebody else. We lock ourselves in our bubble. Can you lock yourself in a bubble? And what these moments give us is an opportunity to say, it's God who has brought transformation there, and it's God who's bringing transformation here. And what we're not asking that we might somehow be made to be more like them. That's also wrong.
Totally.
So we don't want to get out of our bubble into someone else's bubble. What we want is to allow that transfusion of experience to enable us to say, God, I didn't realize this about myself. Would you make me more like you?
Yes. Totally. It's I mean, the worldwide church is an amazing thing. Revelation ends with, look at the clock, every tribe, every tongue, every nation, but it's not countries, it's ethnic groups gathered around the throne. And the more that you can create that, we're praying to do that at B&A, and the more that you can experience it by being with other people, the closer you're getting to a taste of what eternity will look like. And I think that's why we do these things.